At first, I believed that the notion that Cyberpunk 2077 was the best comeback story in gaming was insulting to No Man's Sky. But the more I think about it, the more I believed it to be true. In all fairness to Hello Games, who absolutely deserves praise for their handling of No Man's Sky post launch, the transformation of Cyberpunk 2077 by CD Projekt Red needs to be discussed. While Cyberpunk 2077 was a commercial success, it was a deeply flawed experience that featured unmet expectations and failed to deliver on its own ambitions. On top of that, it was an unpolished mess on consoles, regardless of the generation, and it was a buggy experience, regardless of the platform. What's crazy is that the foundation of Cyberpunk 2077 was solid, but it was nowhere near the level of depth that was featured in CDPR's previous outing, The Witcher 3. Which, by the way, was also fairly unpolished at launch. You know, you can look up Roach on top of rooftops, that type of thing. But this could be excused because of the narrative depth in both the main quest and side quest. They were just fantastic, and also the layered RPG systems found throughout could satiate fans as fixes to the game were applied. Cyberpunk was lacking in everything that made The Witcher 3 great, but these are different games. I felt like the gunplay was solid overall, and the inclusion of certain weapons and abilities made it feel like a true power fantasy. I could overlook the underdeveloped skill trees because what was here was a lot of fun. Was it broken and one-sided? Absolutely. There were systems in place that did nothing to enhance the experience of the game, but you could absolutely dominate any enemy as long as you took the time to complete certain quests during the first third of the game. I mean, how many Atom Smasher getting bullied clips do we need to understand that Cyberpunk 2077 was broken if you really took the time out to take advantage of the existing systems? Outside of the combat, though, the game had a lot of cracks. The life paths meant absolutely nothing. They were essentially window dressing for the first chapter, and afterwards were relegated to dialogue choices that did nothing to shape the outcome of a conversation or a cutscene. This, to me, was a major miss by CDPR because it should have been a layup. This would have incentivized multiple playthroughs, but instead, it just meant nothing in the grand scheme of things. Night City, while one of the most intricately designed environments in gaming, was lacking in terms of depth. This was supposed to be a sprawling city teeming with random events and advanced NPC behavior, but it had none of that. There are a number of YouTube videos that really displayed how poor the NPC behavior was in Cyberpunk 2077. There were some in which you would be walking through a crowd, you would turn around, and the crowd would disappear. There were some where there was no reaction from the crowd in regard to certain events taking place. It felt so empty. Everything that happened to you in Night City was meant to happen, and there was really nothing organic about exploration. Your map told you everything you needed to know. And this sucked because the world itself was so dense and detailed that the occasional random event would have greatly enhanced the experience. Your hand gets held like so many other open world titles. Instead of getting this next gen open world game, we just got more of the same. In my opinion, Cyberpunk 2077's biggest miss is that the main quest and side quest lack consequence. This doesn't mean that the various quests weren't good, many of them were, but being stuck to just success and failure was a disappointment considering how quests were handled in The Witcher 3. It always felt like regardless of the size or the importance of the quest, there was going to be depth in the way they unfolded. There were going to be consequences, and even though they may not impact the world at large, they would definitely impact that immediate area. And this at times would cause tension with certain NPCs. These types of details really helped separate The Witcher 3 from its contemporaries, and it was noticeably absent from Cyberpunk 2077. It's probably one of the weirdest design choices to literally steer clear from what made The Witcher 3 great. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail because the failures of Cyberpunk 2077 have been well documented and covered in other channels. CDPR was met with a lot of criticism, and rightfully so. Their responses at first seemed defiant and tone deaf, but as time went along, CDPR wavered and admitted that the game needed significant fixes. If you want, go ahead and just look up the development of Cyberpunk 2077 and you will see quite the timeline. They had to get their arm twisted a lot to make changes, to at least admit that they had released an unpolished product. It was quite surprising. For nearly 2 years, the development team worked diligently to patch the game, but it didn't change the fact that Cyberpunk 2077 was ultimately a surface-level title that lacked real depth. During this tumultuous time, the planned multiplayer component was scrapped and that only one major expansion in Phantom Liberty would be developed. Now, this was disappointing to hear, but knowing that CDPR would continue to work on Cyberpunk while expanding the lore was appreciated. What was unexpected was that alongside the development of Phantom Liberty, CDPR was working on patch 2.0, which would drastically change how Cyberpunk 2077 played. Practically every single system had been reworked. The various skill trees brought more depth to the gameplay. Night City felt more lived in as random events were added. NPCs and police were more reactive to your actions, and while nothing could be really changed about the existing quests and life paths, Cyberpunk 2.0 was closer to the experience we were initially expecting when the fake demo dropped. It was a better game overall, and while the majority of the quests still lacked consequence, I think it's safe to say what CDPR did for this game should be greatly appreciated given the pressure. Phantom Liberty was released shortly after the 2.0 patch, and this is where we saw the true vision for Cyberpunk 2077. I was skeptical at first, because many were comparing it to The Witcher 3 Blood and Wine in terms of impact, which is quite the compliment, as Blood and Wine is one of the best expansions in gaming. I might be in the minority when I say this, but I think Phantom Liberty has a greater impact on Cyberpunk 2077 than Blood and Wine did with The Witcher 3. Let me explain. If you were disappointed regarding the lack of consequences with the quest found in the base game of Cyberpunk 2077, don't fret. Phantom Liberty raises the stakes significantly. In fact, you can outright fail the first mission and lock yourself out of the remaining expansion just by not going to the President's crash site. You can, however, still explore Dogtown, which is pretty cool, but you're going to lose out on a lot of content. And I really think there needed to be some type of consequence for ignoring the urgency of the situation. It would have been weird if you could just sit there and not do anything the entire time, just drive around. But instead, CDPR was willing to punish the player at the start, and I think this was a nice change of pace. Now, if you're like me, you probably saw this as bait. Because let's be honest, the first major quest in Cyberpunk featured branching paths, and that would rarely be seen afterwards. It wouldn't have been out of the question if Phantom Liberty ended up being a linear narrative experience, but to my surprise and everyone who's played this expansion, that's not the case. This is an expansion that is filled with branching paths, player consequence, and uniquely different outcomes. And by the way, as you're playing through Phantom Liberty, you are given multiple chances to back out. And if you choose to back out, that's the end of it. The game will absolutely just move on without you. And I thought that was great. What's surprising is that this depth doesn't just extend to the main quest line. It also extends to the side quests and to a certain extent some of the gigs. And I really feel like seeing such depth to the gigs was surprising. It was a welcome surprise, but it was really surprising because most of them are just fairly straightforward. You just go to a certain place, you kill a number of characters, or you do a quick investigation and you come back. But that wasn't the case here. Everything really felt a lot like The Witcher 3's narrative experience because the choices you make, no matter the size, could have a massive effect on the characters involved. Certain choices may lead to the death of a character, and this will lock you out of future content. You will absolutely miss out on specific weapons and items if you make certain choices in this, regardless of the quest size. And I thought that was amazing. I reloaded certain saves to see just how different the outcomes could be, and I was surprised that certain characters could be found again in other places in the world, living vastly different lives. That is the type of world building that is commonplace in Phantom Liberty, and this push for continuity is greatly appreciated. Now, as it pertains to the main quest, it is fantastic. And I think an argument can be made that what's here is far more impactful than the base game. And I know that there's going to be some argument about that because your actions generally through Cyberpunk 2077 will help shape the narrative. But Phantom Liberty does introduce certain things that really bring out the desperation in V. They also bring out the desperation in Johnny Silverhand, which is also pretty interesting because they're being introduced into a world that they are not accustomed to. This is a spy thriller, and it features all your favorite tropes found in that genre, and it's a enthralling experience from start to finish. I really feel like the main cast of Phantom Liberty is phenomenal, with the true standouts being So-Mi and Solomon Reed. Both of those characters operate with their own agenda and intent as they are desperate to recruit you to their side. What's great is that if you happen to disagree with either of their plans, you do get a glimpse of their true selves. They don't necessarily outright show you, but you get small hints here and there in body language and tone. And this can be fairly intimidating regardless of the character. Once you start to get to know who So-Mi and Solomon are, you kind of feel scared because these are two characters who will absolutely kill you without a moment's notice. And it's not just So-Mi and Solomon who are fully realized characters, it actually extends to practically all the major players. Alex and the President are really layered, and I think the one character that really surprised me was Mr. Hands, who plays a really significant role in this expansion. This was essentially a random fixer who you knew as a silhouette, but here you get to see what their intent was with Dogtown. Like, they are heavily invested in this area, and they want to ensure that they are the most powerful person operating in this district. It is really interesting to see how they operate and how they view you, because you become somewhat friends, but it's obvious that they're using you to get ahead. By the time you reach the end of Phantom Liberty, you're going to know where every character's allegiances lie, and you're going to make difficult choices regarding their future. Phantom Liberty is a compelling expansion that doesn't feel safe in the slightest. The writing found here is CDPR at their best. As an aside, one of my favorite things about Phantom Liberty is the way Johnny Silverhand is handled. He's not overly aggressive or hostile. In fact, he's quite the opposite. He's far more introspective and cautious. Now, he's still a smartass. He does make certain remarks that will probably make you chuckle a little bit or give him the side eye, but all in all, this is a different side to Johnny. He knows that both sides are withholding information and both sides are playing V, but even he can't tell who's right or who's wrong. He doesn't try to demean V as much in these situations, and there are some scenes where he earnestly provides advice. It's a welcome sight. I really enjoyed the fact that there was a different side to Johnny, and it kind of made you develop a deeper connection with him. Upon completing Phantom Liberty, I took time to gather my thoughts because this is what I've always wanted out of Cyberpunk 2077. This was the game that I thought CDPR was going to originally deliver. This was an in-depth RPG, featuring a layered narrative, diverse characters, branching paths, skill trees that actually mattered, things like that. This was a game that I think we were all looking forward to when that amazing demo dropped. The only downside of Phantom Liberty is that it ends. And the fact that it felt like a different game. It really did. Blood and Wine for The Witcher 3 was complimentary, and it was more of a send-off for the series. Phantom Liberty just feels like it's what Cyberpunk 2077 should have been. And listen, I know that it would have been a Herculean task to ask CDPR to update some of the quests in Cyberpunk 2077 to reflect the changes in Phantom Liberty, but the lack of meaningful consequences found in the base game is noticeable in comparison to the expansion. I think what's here, though, is fantastic, and CDPR definitely deserves praise for being bold enough to make significant changes to improve the overall game and create an expansion that gives players a taste of the game's true potential. By the time this video releases, patch 2.1 is going to be made available to all fans of Cyberpunk 2077, and this is going to add a number of new features, such as being able to listen to the radio on foot. I know that's really small, but sometimes when you're roaming around Night City, it would be nice to just kind of listen to some of the great music they have in this game, and now you finally can. There's new opportunities to hang out with the various romantic partners. So if you want to invite Judy and Pan Am back to your apartment for some quality time, you can do so finally. There's going to be additional chases that you're going to see with certain gangs, If you happen to complete a gig and it crosses a rival gang, you're going to see them try to attack you, which I think is a really cool feature and adds immersion to the game. You're going to see replayable car races that unlock new vehicle based rewards, a bunch of long awaited accessibility options, which is also great, and improved boss fights, which means that Hatem Smasher is hopefully no longer a pushover, but I doubt that also because by the time you reach him, if you complete Phantom Liberty, you're probably going to be incredibly overpowered. You're also going to see the addition of the metro system, which is pretty cool because now you can just ride around and see Night City in its totality, which is something I've wanted to do. Because for whatever reason, when they showed you the metro system and all the different trailers, it was just not available at all when the game initially released. It took 2 years, but at least it's finally here. I really think it's unfortunate that fans will not see another expansion for Cyberpunk 2077, but I am confident that moving forward, CDPR has learned their lesson. All it took was an angry fan base, getting called out constantly, and having your game removed from digital storefronts. It's not much, but it is what it is. In my opinion, Cyberpunk 2077 could have been a generational title, but that would have only been possible if it had received the same attention and care that The Witcher 3 did. If things had gone right from the jump, we would have gotten multiplayer, Phantom Liberty, and more. If the content that was shown in the fake demo was in the game, then imagine the reception the game would have received at release. Now, what I will say is that in the end, CDPR did Cyberpunk 2077 right. They were able to turn a slew of negatives into a positive, so there's reason to be hopeful when looking ahead. There is so much content to explore in the Cyberpunk universe, and it will be interesting to see where the franchise goes next. One of the things that I'm hoping for is more interactivity between the mediums. I wanted more Edgerunner content in the base game. I think a lot of people did. And I know that there's a live action series in the works, and I hope that somehow this content gets mentioned or plays a role in the next game. Here's hoping that CDPR gets it right on the first try next time around. And that's going to do it for this video. If you like the content, please consider like, sharing, and subscribing. I'm Ken from Pixelated Thoughts, and I'll talk to you next time.
Poor fucking bastard.
Feel sorry for him? You?
Dunno, maybe. Guy's bankrupt, all out of hope. Gonna hang himself. You'll see.
Had 7 years to do that and didn't. He's got a chance to turn his life around now.
Chum lost everything. Literally. Just hasn't realized it. Yet.